Need help? Call our cybersecurity team and book a consultation with us today.
Okay, guys, welcome to our continuing wireless WebEx webinar series. My name is Alex Waymar. You don't see my name on this slide because, unfortunately, Jackie Fukushima, who is the author of this great presentation, has come down with laryngitis. Just to prove it, Jackie, would you like to say hello?
Hi guys, I'm sorry I couldn't be able to present, but I'm hoping that Alex Waymar, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll step in to save your voice, but we needed proof of life that you're still here. So we're going to do some housekeeping items real quick. We're going to go through this presentation. It'll be probably about 40 minutes long with some Q&A at the end. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box in WebEx. It might be slightly hidden under the 3 dots, ellipsis, or a Q&A, or depending on what client you're in. We'll either answer them in real time if it's pertinent to the slide we're on, or we'll save them up to the end where we can have a better discussion or more in depth. Real quick about LA Networks. We're definitely over 20-year-old company, started, managed, and led by engineers. We're really known for our engineering talent, and we operate in basically 5 verticals of managed services, pro services, and then in the technology silos for collaboration and voice, data center, network, and security. We're definitely headquartered in LA. It's in our name, LA Networks, and we have a global footprint and a national footprint, but mainly we work with people who are situated and headquartered in the LA basin. We very much like to get a good partnership with our customers and have you call us back after you try us out. If you're not already a customer of ours, we think you'll definitely like us enough to keep us on. So with that said, let's get into the meat of today's presentation. It's wireless, or in this case, Wi-Fi troubleshooting. Jackie wrote this presentation in a manner for basic things you do initially when you find out that you have some Wi-Fi issue, both from the customer's in this case the user's perspective, and also from your IT troubleshooting help desk perspective. There will be a more advanced session for actually getting in and doing some low-level diagnostics and stuff. This one won't be it. This is going to be how to gather the information and maybe resolve, like 80–90% of the problems before you even have to report it up to somebody like us. So that's kind of the overview of what we're doing. So really, we'd like to go over today's bulleted goals, and we're gonna talk about how you're going to use the network, the wireless network, because basically wireless has become such a big thing. Wired is kind of taking a back seat already. Everybody's now using laptops, whereas we all used to use desktops in the past. And so a laptop immediately comes with a wireless component, so people want to roam and take it home, take it to a conference room, that sort of thing. And then as we know, there's billions and billions of mobile devices, phones and such, and tablets out there that all of these, the common issue is wireless. And unfortunately, the wireless experience is either it's working or not working, and if something's not quite working on your device, it's got to be a network issue. So the wireless comes under scrutiny a lot. So we want to kind of eliminate the fear in how to approach the troubleshooting and how to know, what to do first, and basically reduce the time to solution. And these are going to be basically Jackie's tips and tricks. What we're not going to do, as I mentioned, is we're not going to go deep into the low-level debugging. We're not going to talk about how to get onto a controller and do, data dumps and packet traces and that sort of thing. That will be in a future seminar. But we want to talk about the more basic stuff. So we'll get into those in a future day, and so look forward or look in your inbox for those coming up. So Jackie did a review of all of the tickets that we as a managed service provider have received for wireless tickets in the past year. And the interesting breakdown, because this is real world stuff, is definitely over half of them were tickets related to, or this is how they're reported, not necessarily how they were resolved to really what the root cause was, but connection issues. So somebody can't get on a website or what have you, it's a Wi-Fi connection issue. So they open up a ticket like that. But the rest of it, another 40% or so, are still very much Wi-Fi related, whereas maybe they're saying it's slow to load a video or a website, or it's intermittent and they're losing connection. So again, probably a Wi-Fi thing. It could be persons roaming around or not getting the right frequency allocated to them. And then a very, very sliver small issues are going to be reported as other, but basically the bulk of this is going to be related to people reporting, hey, I can't get on the network. This is I love this slide. That's I guess on the left is the Clippy version of a Wi-Fi Clippy throwing his arms up. Yeah, I guess if you're on this call, this is not news to you. Everybody has suffered, whether it's at home and maybe you have a family and kids that are like, why isn't the Wi-Fi working versus in the office or wherever you are. So is it really a wireless issue? Well, again, Jackie's breakdown is of the resolved tickets, overwhelmingly more than half are, no, it really wasn't a wireless issue. It's something else, something tangential or adjacent to the issue that was reported. But still, you got 30–40% of the users that there was something that needed to be fixed. So what are our 3 steps to solving the problem? Well, Jackie broke this down into 3 steps between the basic no hands troubleshooting, which is how to fix it without actually having to do much work, which is great if you can solve it at that step. Step 2 is where you're actually going to dig into what the issues are and how to resolve it. And then finally, but once you've collected all that data and you still haven't, stumbled across what the problem is, then you have to kind of escalate it to somebody, whether that's somebody internal, the one person in your organization who's really a Wi-Fi expert, or whether it's calling LA Networks, or Cisco TAC or something like that. If you've gone through steps 1 and 2, you're going to be really set up for step 3, and it should be an efficient process. We've done countless wireless tickets where step 1 and 2 is really the stumbling block. The user says, "No, I had wireless issues, earlier in the week," and that's how they report it. And now you spend, minutes, hours, days trying to eke out, like, well, what day and what device were you on and what office were you in, and so it's usually if you can get through step 1 and 2 efficiently, then either you've already resolved the problem or you're on the way to handing it off to somebody else without them then starting back over at step 1. And this is a lot like normal, like desktop support kind of troubleshooting process, but we'll dive into, what's slightly different. So our Wi-Fi Clippy guy here is saying, again, what I just said, do some prep work. Trying to prevent the problem from occurring in the first place is worthy of our attention right here, because there's a few things you can do, obviously, to make sure that you don't have problems in the first place. But that's not always something that's easy. Going back to our breakdown of the tickets that we saw for last year, of the ones that were wireless issues, so these are ones that definitely were wireless issues. Again, over half of them were issues that needed to be resolved on the device itself or the user themselves. Maybe it was a user training error, or maybe it was their Wi-Fi stack got slightly askew. So that actually, so as we break down these statistics, you can see that really, and it's again, may not be a surprise, that there's a big user component to this, which you really don't have a lot of control over, but there's stuff that we can do to mitigate that. And step one is have end users that are more, akin to fixing it themselves, perhaps, or at least giving them the tools so that they know when it's a wireless issue versus something else. So some of this depends on how large your environment is. In a corporate environment, you're going to have a lot of this is managed, and locked down. Users can't, let's say, change their SSID or turn their wireless on and off, perhaps. But in a smaller shop, you may have to have users typing in, the settings and putting in their username and password into all the myriad of places, depending on which version of Windows or Mac OS or, which phone you're on. So depending on your infrastructure and your environment, you may need to build some good documentation with screenshots and all that. And again, you guys probably already have that kind of thing. But it doesn't hurt to review that, because as operating systems change, you go from Windows 8 to Windows, 10 to Windows 11, they keep changing the settings and what the screens look like, even within those versions. So keeping that up to date is useful. And then one thing that sometimes we forget when we do our documentation, we show all the steps how to type it in, but we don't show them how to differentiate between when something's working or not working. So as Jackie put in here, show what a successful association looks like. How do you know when you're connected? When that icon in your task tray under Windows, for instance, changes to a slightly different icon. Maybe show some basic, troubleshooting steps, like here's what it looks like when your web page doesn't connect. Here's what it looks like when it does connect versus, when it's a Wi-Fi issue versus something else. We would say go so far as to maybe, if you want Revolt, maybe show them how to do a ping, or something like that in this guide. Some users want to do that, and they want to be smart about it and resolve their problems without having to bug other people. Others may not want to bring up a command prompt. So, and then obviously for guest users, that's a whole nother can of worms. You're going to have to find a way to get people who aren't really even under your, control, how to get them to configure their device to get onto, let's say, your guest network. And everybody has slightly different needs. Some people just have it, you connect to an SSID, no password, it's on. Some people have hotspots where you have to type in a PIN. Some people have authentication where you need to get a text message to their phone, or the guest user has to put in a valid email address. There's a lot of different ways people do it at each place. And of course, let's say you're a traveling salesman and you go to 10 different customers, each site is going to be a different way to get on that company's guest wireless. So how do you post that? How do you make that available to people? And then one thing that we're not talking about yet is how does a guest user resolve their problem? Because again, they're not really under your umbrella. You may not want to expend resources just for their free Wi-Fi. So spending some time on this issue it really pays off. Then the next part of that is we've showed the user how to get onto the network. When they do ultimately have an issue, what do? Do they just throw their hands up? Do they just call the help desk? Or part of the documentation, can you say, hey, you know what? Here's the 3 things I want you to do before you get too frustrated. If you're at your desk and your laptop can't connect to wireless, turn to the person at the cube or desk next to you and say, is wireless working for you, or is it just me? Then you maybe, try a different location. If you took your laptop to the cafeteria and it's not working, see if it works when you're back at your desk. Those are things that we're going to ask you, and it's neat if you already have some of that information. And then obviously, if let's say your laptop doesn't work, but your phone can get on the wireless, that's useful. It's kind of interesting information. Maybe you're, we can deduce if it's like, say, your AD account password is locked versus your actual SSID is incorrect. There's a lot of different things we as the networking people can discern from just these 3 questions. Again, if you're a guest user, though, that's kind of a problematic thing because you're probably not under corporate control. There's no mobile device manager that enforces your SSIDs and that sort of thing. So for an end user, either at a very small company where maybe you don't lock these settings down, or for guest users, you may need to have a tiny little troubleshooting sheet that says, you know, turn Wi-Fi on and off, toggle it, maybe reboot your device, maybe try and reconnect. These aren't things that we normally want an end user to do because, first off, it's really not their business to have to try and troubleshoot that deeply. And secondly is that if it does work, if you reboot your computer and your wireless starts working, you haven't fixed the problem. So it's just going to come back to bite you a little later, and then your user is going to think that they have to reboot their computer every day just to get on the network, which, you know, isn't the experience that we really want them to have. But so basically, if you have your end users go through a couple of steps, again, not everybody's going to want to do it, but at that point, obviously, let them call you up, open a ticket, you know, escalate this. And then on the help desk side, or on the IT support person side who's going to be receiving that ticket, there's some stuff you need to write down and get, regardless of what it is. Don't skip these steps. If a user says, hey, man, I can't get on the network today, don't just start right away and say, hey, reboot your computer, or hey, what's this show? Try and get some information written down. It'll speed up the process for you. If you have to escalate to anyone else, it'll be great to have that already recorded. We want to know who the person is. If they got a username, that'll show up in an authentication server. That would be great to know. We definitely want to know the date and time this issue happened. So those are things that you should be able to get, the location where they were. Users should be able to rattle all of those off to you very quickly. The next one is getting the device MAC address, which is redundant. But yeah, if you get the MAC address, that lets us really do a lot of searching in the back end and see where that device has been and where it's trying to associate. Unfortunately, that's not always simple. A lot of devices have gotten easier to find a MAC address. I know on mobile phones, they pretty much, you can click on your Wi-Fi settings and it'll pop up the MAC address finally after many, many years of trying to figure out where, and like say an iPhone, you can find a MAC address. Still on Mac, desktop PCs, it can be difficult. You may be bringing up a command prompt. You may be doing silly stuff like that. On other random devices, barcode scanners and things like that, you may be having to take a magnifying glass to a sticker somewhere that has the MAC address, in the tiniest font ever imaginable, written down and smeared. But that's really important, and I can't stress how important having a MAC address is, and it is the most painful part of asking any end user, for reading out a 16 hex, digit code to you. If you can avoid that and you have management apps and stuff that lets you find a person without a MAC address or find a device without it, that's great. But we've noticed nowadays, just saying that's a username, that doesn't help if they also have a phone and a tablet and a laptop, and how do we know which device is the one that's having the problem? It takes extra long then in the troubleshooting to kind of whittle it down. So again, I'll stress, get the MAC address, that's important. The type of issue, obviously we need to know what the problem is and which SSID they're connecting to or trying to connect to. Some companies have many SSIDs. I mean, if you're in an entertainment company or something, you may have a dozen productions going on at the same time, all using different wireless, or you may have different class of users and IoT devices and all sorts of stuff. Obviously, don't forget that. That's important. Just saying I can't connect to wireless isn't going to help if you have to escalate this ticket to somebody else. And then I love Jackie's, again, these are pulled out of real tickets, saying wireless is down, wireless sucks. Well, yeah, we all say that, but that doesn't help on the ticket. We need to know, why does it suck? What is your error message? I can't imagine telling somebody, I can't get to this website. Well, that's great. There's a message somewhere on your screen, either in your browser or you have a blue screen of death or something is going to tell you why you can't get there, or it's just a spinning icon. But all of those things tell us a little bit more about, what the problem could be. So try and get those when that user contacts you. Kind of back to the idea of proactive preventative maintenance is a number of wireless issues will come out of out-of-date drivers, things like that. This is more so with like laptops and things. It's gotten a lot more stable, but it used to be, if you had a certain built-in Wi-Fi chip in your laptop and it didn't have the right driver, it would impact the wireless stack and you may not get on. I think that's a little bit less than we've seen maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I think a lot of laptops have coalesced on just using Intel chips and other chips. But there's some of these other ones are important. Obviously, if you're using certificate-based authentication, eventually those certificates expire. And what is your process to eke that out? Asking a user, hey, is your machine certificate expired? It's just not going to work. They have absolutely no idea what the heck you're talking about. So how do you figure that out? Especially if the device, let's say, is offline because it can't get on the wireless. You can't really remotely troubleshoot that easily. So what is your mechanism to do that? It's one of the things which happens frequently enough that it should be in your troubleshooting procedure if you're using certificates. So making sure they get renewed and watching your certificate authority server to see that people have turned their laptop on, have connected maybe over VPN and renewed their certs important. Wireless profiles definitely is the way to go if you have a Microsoft GPO, or definitely if you're using like Cisco AnyConnect, the network management portion of that. You can lock down those devices to a specific SSID, and the user doesn't need to sit there typing in encryption types and passwords and what type of keys to use. Get all that set in stone and then deployed, automatically. You don't want users having to go into those wireless settings, especially under Windows, if you can avoid it. Again, if you're a smaller shop and don't do that kind of thing and users are just typing in a pre-shared key, that's great. But if you're doing stuff like that, try and make it easier. Don't have pre-shared keys that have lowercase L's and the number 1 and, stuff that maybe isn't easy to read if it's on a notepad or a printed email or whatever. Think about what the end user experience is, because you will reduce your tickets if you can. All right, Jackie, what's step number 2? We're going to do things as the tech. So we got the information from the customer, from the end user, and now we're going to see what we can fix based on that information. So, okay, so we're collecting this information. So this is kind of like your checklist here of things to enter in to your ticket. If you have a formal ticket solution where you're actually typing these things in, yeah, if you can have a form where you put this in so you don't forget these, that's great. Obviously, you're not going to get 100% of this 100% of the time, but you got to make the effort to try and ask. And then once you have that ticket in there, then you can start the troubleshooting based on that knowledge. Again, hopefully that end user asks the person next to them, if they're having a problem or not. So if you ask the user, is this just you or everybody else? And you're like, I don't know, then you may need to call some other people, or you may need to get on your console and see, hey, normally we have 100 people connected on wireless. Today we only see 20. That's kind of odd. But that's, again, a huge troubleshooting thing to figure out if it's an isolated individual or if it's like a whole area. Maybe an access point is down, or maybe there's a jammer or an interferer in that area. So it's much more interesting to know if it's a single person versus multiple. And sometimes you may not know, but you got to ask the question. The next one is a troubleshooting jackpot. Does the same issue occur on a wired network? Obviously, if you have the same issue on the wired network as you do on the wireless network, then it's not a wireless issue. There's something upstream that's broken. How do you get an end user to test that? Well, that's really difficult. If their laptop's on a dock and they can dock and undock when that switches between wireless and LAN, that's great. If you have a person that maybe the coworker next to them is on a desktop, an old school desktop on a LAN jack, maybe you can have them test, If you don't have any of those, then you may need to go out there and plug into a LAN port at that site, at that office, at that place, and see, is the network working there? Maybe just their internet connection goes down. So many of those tickets that Jackie had in those pie charts it's not a wireless issue, it's just the internet connection is down, and, that immediately becomes, my wireless doesn't work. But the only way to test that is to be able to have a different device there. And if you're a network admin and have access to a device, a host, something in that site that you can remote control and then try and, duplicate the issue from that wired device, that's great. As we said, having up-to-date firmware and drivers and stuff is a great thing. Has this device that they're calling in about been off the network for the last year and they just dusted it off? Maybe it needs something. A good one is with the client roaming or stationary. Well, the user may not know that they're roaming, but if they're walking around, we can pretty much assume that they're roaming between access points. So unless you only have one access point in that office that the user is complaining about, there's a good chance that a problem could be that they're walking around and they're between two access points, and the client is oscillating back and forth between them, and it's creating some intermittent drops, especially if you're on a voice call or something over Wi-Fi. You'll notice that. But a user could actually be sitting at their desk, and their device could be switching between different APs due to different radio frequency issues. We've seen that happen plenty of times. But asking them if they're stationary or if they're walking around, that's important. Are they going between buildings and they're dropping a call or something? We've seen a lot of tickets like that. Any error messages, like we said, there's always something that pops up. If it just says, connection dropped or something, that may be all we can get. But you never know. There may be something else that they're seeing, like in their browser or in their application. You may have an application that says, bandwidth congested, or high latency, or depending on the app that you have, maybe there's something that can give us more info. And then I think I think Jackie said this one's very important. Was this working before, or is this like a new thing? So if this is the first time you've ever used this laptop or this phone, or you just got a brand new upgraded phone and you can't get on wireless, it's a different troubleshooting process than, this has been working for a year straight and just today it stopped connecting. That tells us loads, because it could be a configuration setup. If it's a brand new device, and we can easily fix that, go back to our script on how to set up the wireless, and we're fixed. So those are the common questions that we're going to want to ask. And you may get it fixed just from asking those 6 questions. If not, and you need to do a little bit more work, try and recreate the issue. That's a great one. A lot of these wireless issues are intermittent, and that's the worst. As anybody who's tried to troubleshoot an intermittent issue, as soon as you go to look at it, it's working. So it's how to catch it when it's not working, because that's really the only time you can collect the right information. So try and recreate the issue. If you're local to the person who's having the problem, and you can walk over there with your own device and see the same problem on your device, well, that's great, because now you can let that user go and not have to bug them and take up their precious time, and you can troubleshoot it on your own. If you can't, and that's only that one person's having that one problem every other day when you're not there, it's going to take a while to figure it out. But again, if you can recreate it, you may be most of the way to fixing it or discovering the issue. Like we said, if you can walk up to that same area and to do the same issue over a wired connection, then we can rule out Wi-Fi. That's a great quick test if you're there. If it's not, it may be more difficult if you're remote. Different device, same sort of thing. If you have your own laptop and your own phone, mobile device, you can try connect to the same SSID. Obviously, all of these things may just work, and it may just be a client issue. As our statistics showed, it's probably something on that person's device. But you can also try connecting to different SSIDs. So maybe the access point is fine, but there's something wrong with, the guest network versus the actual, corporate network. They're both going through the same wireless infrastructure, but that'll let you rule out radio frequency interference. It'll let you rule out, access points being offline, that sort of thing. Obviously, the going back to troubleshooting 101 is for any networking issue, you want to try and ping your default gateway. If you can't ping your default gateway, you got problems. Of course, it can be the wireless connectivity issue is what's preventing you, but it also could just be you're using the wrong gateway or netmask, or your DHCP is broken. We'll talk a little bit more about that because we see a lot of tickets like that. But then if you can ping the gateway, then try and ping something on the internet. I think everybody here knows 888 and 444 or 422, all the common stuff. Ping it by IP address, because we also see a lot of tickets that are related to DNS. So, people are like, my wireless is down. Why? Oh, I can't get to google.com. Okay, but I can ping this IP address, so we know the internet's working, and we know by definition then your wireless is working. So if you just walk up to a computer and ping google.com and it doesn't work, look at the error message. It's going to say it couldn't look up the DNS. But that's something, again, that's basic troubleshooting. You guys should probably have competency in that, because that's what we've been doing on wired networks for decades, but it's still important. And then the last couple things you can do is actually dig into whatever your wireless platform is. If it's a cloud controller, like a Meraki dashboard, or if it's a local like wireless LAN controller or something like that, or if you have a management platform like, let's say, a Cisco DNA center, you can go in there and start poking around and looking up MAC addresses and looking at the Wi-Fi health and the access points, see what their power levels are and frequencies, and if they're changing and all that. So that's where our advanced troubleshooting session will get into, is really everything beyond the normal checks of the client. And then Jackie has reboot the AP. Well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. That obviously, if it's only one person having the problem, you don't want to create a bigger outage. If everybody's having a problem and you looked in your wireless platform and you see that AP is weird and it has nobody connected to it, even though it shows it's online, sure, give it a reboot. Usually that's an admission of running out of ideas, but times of the essence, maybe you can't do any harm. If you try and reboot the AP and it doesn't come back up, well, then we know for sure there's something wrong with the AP. But yeah, we put that at the bottom of the list because that's kind of what we would call a Hail Mary. So, common network issues. So we kind of alluded to some of these already. As Jackie said, it could be a hardware issue. So we've had issues where, occasionally an access point fails. It does happen. It's not that often, though, but it could be. More likely, it's going to be something like a cable issue, like a cable got unplugged, or, the PoE isn't coming across that cable anymore, the AP lost power. Those are what we see as the most common thing. In other environments, other than offices like warehouses and stuff, we will see, people run a forklift into an AP or an antenna and mess it up. Or in a school or something where, somebody's playing kickball or softball and nails the AP. That happens. Those are physical failures versus just like a firmware or a melted processor. But pretty much we see a lot of the bulk of the issues being something maybe on a server like DHCP, DNS. The DHCP issues are nasty because they're really hard to diagnose from the user's point of view. So if you're the network admin, but you're not the server admin, and the server admin owns the DHCP server and the network admin owns the access point, that's one of those that's one of those issues where, you know, the division of labor may add to the delay of solving this, because you don't want to go bug a server guy every time there's a network problem, right? So how do you figure out it's a DHCP issue? Well, if you're looking at the client and the client's attached and authenticated but doesn't have an IP address, and they're using one of those auto config 169 addresses, or maybe it's an IP version 6, you know, address, you're like, that's weird. It should have a normal IPv4 address. So you may want to start looking at that and see if, you know, it's going to be more than one person usually. It's going to be everybody on that SSID or VLAN. But we will see on guest networks, we'll see DHCP exhaustion, where you maybe have lease time set to a day or a week or whatever, and suddenly you have an influx. Let's say you have a tour bus go by and everybody tries to connect to your guest Wi-Fi for a couple seconds, and they all get IP addresses, but then they disappear, right? And then the next tour bus comes by and they try and connect, and oh gosh, there's no IPs left because we just locked down that scope for 7 days, you know, and won't release it. So we see a lot of that where you just don't have enough IP addresses. And that comes and goes, because as addresses get released, then it'll work for a few more people. So it looks like an intermittent issue. And again, we're talking about guest users, so you don't really have access to look at their computer or their mobile device and troubleshoot it from their point of view. So those are easy to get caught up in. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about server issue, duplicate IP issues. DHCP duplicate IPs has been an issue going back decades or millennia at this point. There's mitigations for that should prevent that from happening, but we still see that happening, and we'll have an example of that for you in a bit. And then the last big common issue is just switch issues. So you may have a, you know, an AP plugged into a switch, and the AP maybe needs to have a trunked port so it can be on different VLANs, and the switch port is set to be an access port with only one VLAN. So one of the SSIDs is going to work great, all the other ones are going to fail. We see that a lot. Or it could just be other things, again, like PoE. Maybe you're not getting enough power to that device. I've seen a lot of issues where you have a switch. Switches only have a certain amount of power that they can allocate to different devices, right? So you may have a 24-port switch that works great with 10 phones and 3 APs, but once you add that fourth AP, it starts shutting off random phones or random APs, you know, or seems random, because it doesn't have enough power to allocate. So that would be an intermittent issue that's hard to track down until you finally, you know, can see that it's the switch that's yelling, you know, I'm out of power, I'm out of power. So there's a few of those issues, but again, advanced troubleshooting course, we'll talk about that. This one, I think, again, Jackie says this is the most important thing to ask is, were there any changes? What's changed? Yeah, anything in IT can be related back to something making a change, either automated or you know, something that we've done manually, like an upgrade. Yeah, I think we just had an issue recently. It wasn't wireless related, but people, you know, are scratching their heads. Is it licensing? Is it firewalls? Is it whatever? And, you know, it's like, oh no, it's like an endpoint protection agent updated its settings and decided to start blocking things that weren't blocked the day before. You know, so it's always something is making a change. If it's something obvious because you did an upgrade that weekend, then we can kind of pump the brakes and take a look and say, hey, was that the issue? And we can short circuit the whole troubleshooting method. If not, you know, we continue on the troubleshooting path until we find out what it was that did change. You know, it'll be something like a operating system update, or you know, a user changed their name because they got married and then that wasn't updated in the wireless settings, that was hard coded to their previous username, or, you know, there's always something. But if you ask a user if anything changed, and you ask your network people or desktop people if anything changed, you know, you may go down a few paths that are fruitless, or you may find something that kind of sticks out as, oh yeah, that could have done that. And then step 3, which is, again, you've pretty much gone through your troubleshooting, you know, list of things that you can test. and you're like, hey, this is above my pay grade. I can't figure this out, and that happens to everyone. Who do you do? What do you do? Who do you do? You call your like your Cisco TAC. You call your LA networks. You say, yeah, we got this problem. It's intermittent. It's really becoming a customer-facing issue. People think our wireless sucks when it's really just this one executive's assistant that can't get on the network, or what do you do? Well, you've collected all this data, right? Well, okay, we'll go through the scenarios here because these are good. But yeah, the common issues that we'll see is we're having issues, can you fix it? Or we're having poor performance, can you fix it? It's like, well, the answer is always yes, but do you have more information? Can you help us scope out what the actual problem is? So since you've already collected all this information, your end user has done some of that. You've done it when you've opened the ticket internally in step 1 and step 2, and you did a little bit of troubleshooting. Maybe you walked around, you weren't able to duplicate the issue. You tried wired versus wireless. You tried SSIDs. What else can you do? Well, hopefully you also were able to log into your wireless platform, again, your cloud or on-prem device. Hopefully you have a floor map that shows, or floor plan that shows where the access points are, so you have an understanding of where the problem occurred and where your closest access points are. And you have all that. Now you want to call in the experts. Well, you're going to have all those ready to go. Otherwise, we're going to ask you for it, and you're going to have to go back and start collecting some of it. Especially if you're not like let's say with LA Networks, if you're not a managed customer and you call us out of the blue and say, man, we're having this problem, we're going to say, well, yeah, do you have an idea who these people are? Do you have a floor plan that shows your access points? Do you have a login to your wireless management? And we're going to ask you all that stuff. So have it ready. Going back to the proactive part, if you don't already have a wireless survey or don't know what a wireless survey is, please refer again to our YouTube wireless seminar list. We talk about the benefits of surveys. Can't stress it enough. Wired stuff is easy because you have a switch in a closet and you know where the wires kind of go, and you can put a tester on each end of that cable. Wireless is ephemeral and it's constantly changing on it. Whatever you think about wireless today, it's different tomorrow because it's always dynamically changing. There's more devices, there's different interferences. So the only thing you can do is have a baseline idea of how your wireless should be set up, and that's what a survey really will give you. It'll let us know, given everything set up the way it is today, how does a signal get from this AP through these walls to that end user, and that really helps us. Because if the end user calls in a problem and it's intermittent, and we know on the wireless survey, they're in an area that was never really deemed priority. They're in a stairwell, or something, or they're behind, a bunch of metal filing cabinets where we know the signal can't easily get to. That's easy. That tells us that we can make a change to your environment, add another AP or reconfigure some stuff to fix it. But if you've never done a survey and you don't have that information, or it's really, really, really old, like, many years old, we're kind of working in the dark, and we're going to have to rely on again, your platform like your Meraki or DNA Center to try and stitch together a map of what things look like at this moment. But that's another thing to bring up is when we ask if anything has changed recently, it's not just the network. Did somebody come in on the weekend and install new furniture, or did they paint, or did they put in new LED lighting so they were in the ceiling messing with, ceiling tiles and things like that? That just popped in my head, sorry. The next one is obviously you need to have the documentation to back everything up. What are all the SSIDs? What are they for? Who uses them? What user groups? That kind of thing. I know we don't always have good documentation, but if you're going to be opening or escalating up your ticket to somebody else, they really don't know your environment necessarily as well as you do. So being able to point them to a document or being able to cut and paste stuff for them, that would be great. And then anytime you add another access point or remove something or renovate a room, you got to remember that somewhere there's this document that won't reflect that. So if you can update that, that would be great. Otherwise, you know, it's the entropy of documentation where it just kind of gets less and less pertinent. And we already talked about the proactive maintenance. Basically, keep things up to date. One of the things is if you're not looking at your wireless, like people don't look at their wired network. Once it's been rack mounted in the switch closet, they basically, it's like, yeah, it just works. You know, like anything else, it just works. Wireless is, again, not like that. It's dynamic, it changes. If you're never looking at your controller or your management platform, you really don't know. Wireless technology today is kind of self-healing, and there's a lot of things we do now, or the products do now, to try and make up for coverage holes, to try and avoid interferers and things like that. But you may not know that you're running in a reduced capacity. You may be down a couple access points. You may have a neighbor who moved in who suddenly decided this weekend to change all of their frequencies, and now they're stepping on what was working great the day before. So your clients will try and get by, and they may not notice that things are slower. They may not notice that, you know, there's an issue. But if you let it go too long without ever checking on it, one day, you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back will happen, and another AP will fail, and then all of a sudden, a half a building isn't able to get on. So being able to check your wireless, or contract somebody like LA Networks to you know, do managed wireless services, so we're checking on it for you. And then having that baseline with the surveys and the floor plans and all that. If you have your own wireless expert, hopefully you have a good feel for what that baseline is. If you have a managed provider like us or something, we will have that kind of baseline, and because we'll be looking at it very frequently. But that's good to have. So we got 3 examples here of how to go through the troubleshooting. These are real world examples with the names modified to protect the innocent or the guilty, but they're actually good. They're not exactly unique. These are just good examples of things we've seen multiple times. So example 1 is we got a user at a certain office saying that, hey, you know, I can't really connect. It seems to be stuck. And there's an error saying no IP address. Well, great, we got an error. That puts us well on the path of figuring it out. The person receiving that help desk call, you know, asked them, you know, is this just you? Is it somebody else? Is it the entire office? You know, can I get your MAC? And they looked it up and they tried to find the user and weren't able to find them inside their controller. So, you know, that's a problem. So they actually did try and duplicate the issue with the end user, and were able to recreate and verify that, yeah, they're having a problem. So in this specific example, after digging deeper into the logs, into their authentication server logs, not necessarily their wireless controller, they saw that, you know, there's an obvious bad login, you know, user unknown or password unknown issue. So that was one of those things where, you know, the user had their password hard coded in versus just using an automatic login mechanism. So if you're using pre-shared keys, this will happen. You know, obviously, if you change a pre-shared key, everybody needs to switch over to it, and you may get somebody who hasn't used wireless in a long time because they were on a docking station, and one day they picked their laptop up and they realize they can't get on the network, and you know, the change may have been done months ago. So you can't ask them what's changed recently because they didn't know. But that's an easy one. And the MAC address, again, was key here because that's how they were able to track down the device and then find the authentication error. So that's a pretty common one. Example 2 is very representative of the type of tickets that get escalated up to us. It's like, hey, you know, we got a user or a group of users. They're complaining it's slow when they are connected, but they also get dropped intermittently. and they're all guest users, so some of them, aren't even able to report it to us because, they don't even know who to call. But the ones that do complain about it because they're maybe guests in a conference room or whatever, we can't really troubleshoot them. This specific ticket took a while to fix because again of the issue, it's intermittent, and you can't really ask guest users to let you troubleshoot their devices. But after a bunch of time goes by and different groups doing different tests, this was one of those duplicate IP addresses. So there was found a second DHCP service that was handing out IPs, and if you have two different servers handing out the same range of IPs, eventually they'll clash and both hand out the same address to different people. And again, on a guest network, that's really, really hard to figure out because it's very transient. People come and go. Maybe you're on for a couple hours and then they don't come back ever. So it's really hard to figure that out. But this was, one of the things I think that ultimately got solved with just Wireshark packet trace sniffing. So that was a tough one. But we've seen this multiple times. This isn't a one-off. We're not just picking a unique one. And then the last example we have is about a multiple users complaining about having issues with different SSIDs. And there was some information gathered, there was some live troubleshooting, and really the only way to figure it out was to log into the controller. And this was something that the help desk people weren't really that wasn't part of their job description. They were just taking the tickets and doing the basic troubleshooting. So had to be escalated to a wireless engineer to go in and see. And then this customer in this case didn't really have what we said a couple slides earlier, proactively looking at it and monitoring and getting notification of issues. So what had happened was multiple APs had fallen off the network, had gone silent. They didn't all go at the same time. It was the onesie twosies. Generally, in this case, would be if they lost power to a given AP, it wouldn't be able to get back onto the network. So again, self-healing network, you get by with a few APs, and then as the number dwindles, you get more and more issues. But again, depends where you're standing, depends how strong the signal is. People may not notice at all. So the takeaway from this one was you need to have monitoring of some sort because these silent issues, you can't just let them fester. They eventually will cause a bigger issue. And like we said here, 5 out of 8 APs in one office were offline. That's both a testament to the how resilient this stuff is, but also how you need to stay on top of it. With that in mind, again, more in the advanced troubleshooting session, but there are tools you can use. And if you're not the wireless expert and you're not trained in this, these may be too much to learn, and you want to call in somebody like us. But for really esoteric issues with radio frequency interference, you need a spectrum analyzer. You need to be able to see all the non-Wi-Fi things that are out there. The most obvious one is like a microwave oven. If you have a bad seal on a microwave oven door, whenever you turn it on, you're going to interfere with 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, and it's obvious. And you'll have people every lunchtime, in the cafeteria going, wireless was good up until a few minutes ago, and then it started getting bad. It's like, yeah, it's probably because of that. But you have other things. There's radio frequency from, radios and other analog devices. And then there's just bad people out there jamming things. If you're in a public venue, you can have issues where you have to track down where somebody's actively jamming. But then the survey tools that we mentioned, those can be both easy and hard to use, depending on what level of survey you're doing. But those are good to learn. And then the assurance tools, here we're listing like Cisco DNA Center, those are great. It's great to be able to know when somebody calls in and says, 2 days ago I was in this conference room and I lost connection to my Microsoft Teams meeting at 11 a.m. It's like, great, this is 2 days later. I can't diagnose that as readily as you may think. If you have an assurance tool that can let you go back in time and see that MAC address and see what APs it was roaming to and connecting to, and its reported signal strength, you know, back then, that's worth its weight in gold, because now you can actually troubleshoot it, you know, and you don't have to wait for it to reoccur, and you don't have to necessarily, you know, get that user to be in the same situation again. And again, advanced session, we'll talk about how those work and the beauty of those things. And then Wi-Fi sensors is kind of a great new vogue thing to do, is to be proactive. So these Wi-Fi sensors act as if they're a client, as if they're an end user, and you say, you know, log into this corporate Wi-Fi and go to this web page. Log into the guest network and go to this, you know, web page. And it'll track how long it takes to connect to the wireless and get authenticated, and it'll tell you if it got a DHCP address and if DNS is slow, and it really kind of gives you that user experience in metric. So you can tell, hey, all of a sudden it's taking, you know, 4 minutes to get an IP address from the DHCP server. Let's go investigate. And again, this is like a canary in a coal mine. You'll get those alerts well before a user starts opening tickets saying they're having a problem, because you'll know that you've exceeded your baseline for any of this stuff. So that's really good. So kind of to recap the process here. Is that, yeah, the troubleshooting is like normal troubleshooting for wired, but you know, it's good to refresh your process if you don't have it documented specifically for wireless. Always start with the basics and work your way up. As you get more experience, that kind of becomes a stumbling block, because you think you can short circuit this process and say, oh, I think I know what it is. And then, you know, hours go by and you realize, actually, that wasn't it. Now we have to go back and still do the basics. So, you know, don't let, you know, hubris get in the way. It's always good to collect the basic information, and we'll say that again and again. Get the MAC address. And then know your environment and keep it healthy. That's a lot. It's a lot summarized in a couple of points, but that's basically what it is. We'll come back to the Q&A real quick. I just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of what we're capable of doing in LA Networks for you. Just want to put in our 2 cents. We're really good at doing the wireless surveys for you if you have never had them done before, and we can come to wherever you are and do that. We can also do synthetic surveys where you just give us a floor plan and we can tell you for, let's say, a new building that hasn't been built yet where access points should be located. And we're able to do just a basic assessment or health check of your environment. If let's say you haven't looked at it in a while and you realize now it's an issue and you want to head it off, we can come in and basically give you, you know, an understanding of what's working, what isn't working, what best practices are to upgrade that. And obviously, if this is just like, hey, this is just a headache, I don't want to have to staff people to do this, you know, obviously you can call us up and we'll be happy to do that as kind of a virtual staff for you and do managed services for you. And so going back to the health check package, because that's listed here, that's kind of all encompassing. We'll do a survey, we'll review your controller and AP settings and all that. And then we'll even give you some ideas about, you know, how secure it is and what settings you're having that maybe can be improved for wireless security, because we haven't even talked about that. We have other webinars that go into the security aspects, and we'll give you a nice report for that. So with that said, I don't know if we have any questions. I've been talking really fast. Oh, okay, we got a few. What client-side common errors should I be on the lookout for? Oh, client, again, it depends on your environment. If you're just an operation that has pre-shared keys, you know, in one SSID, it's really, really simple. But if you have multiple ones and some users have to use one and others use another, and you have IoT SSIDs and stuff like that, you know, how do people connect to these different ones? And a lot of wireless is reliant upon the client to make the decision. We can't really control what a client does. So if a client wants to roam to a different AP, it will roam. If it wants to switch to a different SSID because it thinks it has a better internet connection, it will do that. So there is no real easy way to answer that question other than there's a lot of stuff on the client that will do what it wants to do. What is your recommendation for authentication, search radius, PSK? Okay, well, we have that in another webinar, but in a summary, the levels of security go from no security, open, which used to be acceptable for guests, but nowadays people are even trying to encrypt the guest network because it's really kind of uncool if you give somebody guest access, but they're not savvy enough to know that their online banking session that they're doing on your guest network can be sniffed by anybody in the area. So that's open is slowly going away. But then pre-shared key, where you just type in a random, not a random, but you type in a password that's hopefully only known to the people who are allowed to get on. That's the least secure above that. And then username and password is good. Because with pre-shared key, everybody in the organization can only be on the key at the same time. You can't change it without starting to lock people out, right? You need everybody to change at the same time. Username and password is nice because now we can track individual users. And if a user, let's say, leaves the company, terminated, what have you, as soon as you disable their username, they can't get on the wireless. You don't have to change the pre-shared key for the whole institution because you just let somebody go. But it's not really as secure because anybody who knows that person's password can now get on your wireless, and that user themselves could log in with their own personal devices because they can just type in their username and password. So certificates are really the most secure because you can issue the cert to a device and then only that device can get online. So that corporate laptop is the only one that can get on the corporate SSID. The user can't clone it or move that to another device. So that's kind of the whole pantheon of security. I think that's all our questions. Okay, so we will post this to YouTube. Thank you all for attending. And again, if you have any questions about Wi-Fi upgrades, want an assessment done, or want some help with it, by all means, give us a call. And look forward to possibly seeing you guys in our next session. We have a session coming up next month, which is going to be regarding legacy Wi-Fi and if it's okay to kill off your legacy, like 2.4 gigahertz, wireless and stuff like that. What are the pros and cons of that, and what is legacy considered nowadays? And then again, we'll have an advanced troubleshooting deep dive in a future session. So look out for those invites in the future. All right, thank you all for joining.
Need help? Call our cybersecurity team and book a consultation with us today.